guys, welcome back to Chess the Matthew. So on this video, I will show you the deadly weapon against the Queen's Gambit. So the Queen's Gambit start with the move d4, d5, and after c4, we will use the same slab variation against the Queen's Gambit Declined. For example, after c6, and after knight c3, we will play e6 and to decline the gambit from the c4, and just to develop these pieces and have immediate king safety on the king side. And after, for example, the white plays knight f3, we will just play knight to f6, and for example after e3, the white here cannot afford actually to play bishop to g5 on this position because there is a queen to b6 and has an immediate attack from the b2. For example, if this bishop was not defending and instead playing bishop to g5. So after e3 here, blocking his bishop and eliminating any bishop to g5 move, we will simply play as black with knight b to d7 and just trying to have a development and also a control on the center. For example, after this knight b to d7, it controls the e5 square. And for example, after queen to c2, in which the white here actually immediately have an intention to control the e4 with queen and knight, for example, but on this position, the white here cannot yet go for e4 because it was actually defended by two pieces against these two pieces also for white. So here on this position, we will simply play as black with bishop to d6 and trying to complete the development on the king side and later on to have a king side castling and wait, for example, for white to the development of the light square bishop of the white. For example, if he play bishop to e2 or even to bishop to e3. For example, on this position, if the white here plays bishop to e2, we will simply play here kingside castling. So that, for example, after kingside castling for white, we will play rook to e8 and trying to have control on the e file with the rook, knight, and bishop. And later on, we will play queen to e7 to try to open the e file and to attack the bishop, for example, and also trying to eliminate this knight because it was the defender of this bishop and with the queen. And for example, after rook to d1, we will simply play here queen to e7, and if the white here play e4, we'll just grab that pawn with d takes e4, and after knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4. Again, it's like I said, the black here should play e5 and open the e file with an attack of the queen and the rook battering on the e file. So after bishop to g5 here, in which we actually following the game of Hobner and Kasparov here play queen to f8. The idea here is to escape from the attack of the bishop and defending his king with his queen. For example, after bishop to d3 here, in which the white here actually threatening to mate in one against the black king, but Kasparov here plays f5, trying to attack this queen with the pawn. Although, for example, on this position, the pawn has only one defender versus two attacker. For example, his opponent here grabbed that pawn, but it is actually a trap because there is knight to f6. And we shall see in this position now that the queen was actually been trapped by the black because the queen here was actually attacked by the bishop on c8. And in just 15 moves, the black here wins against the Queen's Gambit Declined with the same slab variation. So going back, for example, after d4, d5, c4, c6, the slab variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined. And for example, after knight c3, e6, knight f3, knight f6, e3, knight b7, queen c2, and bishop d6, clearing the square for his king to have immediate kingside castling for a king safety. And for example, if the white here plays bishop to d3, instead from the latter move that he play queen to e2, for example, we try to look the bishop to d3 and following the game of Sasikaran versus Crazy, in which after bishop to d3, although it has an immediate direct defense or attack on the center with bishop and knight, for example, and again to the king side of black, but the black here can actually win a tempo for this bishop later on. For example, after kingside castling, because there is a simple d takes to c4, in which the white here was obliged to answer the move of black with d takes to c4 because it attacks now the bishop to d3. And for example, if the white grab that pawn but there's a simple b5, again attacking this bishop with a pawn. And for example, after bishop to d3, the black here has gained a tempo by developing a piece. For example, after bishop to b7 while attacking this bishop. And for example, after h3 here, again the black here can gain a tempo for a development. For example, after b4, because this b4 pawn attacks now the knight. So after knight to a4, here comes now the c5 move for Queasy, in which it actually attacks now the d4 and also the center. And after the white here plays d takes to c5, but there is a simple rook to c8, pinning this pawn and stopping it to have a capture on d6 on the next move, because the queen here is on the c2, inlining to the rook on c8. So after queen to e2, escaping to the indirect attack of the rook. But after knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, and a simple e4 for white, it allows here for the black to play queen to c7, in which the black here actually completed his development and ready to attack now the white's king, because the black here connects now his rook, while the white here is actually behind the opening, because on this position the white here has not yet connected his rook and his bishop is still on the c1. So the white here is actually behind in development and he should cope up with development, and the white tries here to complete his development with bishop to g5, but still there is knight to h5, again attacking this important square against the white's king. And for example, after queen to d2, here comes now the aggressive attack for the black, because after f5, in which it tries to open up now the f file and tries to ruin the white's camp. And for example, after rook to f8, here comes now the f takes e4, because after bishop takes e4, and rook takes e4, here comes now a deadly attack from the black perspective after rook takes f3, because it forced now to g takes f3. Although the white here actually wins a piece, but again his pawn structure on the king side was actually been ruined, so it was vulnerable to the attack of the black's pieces. For example, after queen to g3, in which this pawn cannot capture the queen because it was actually pinned. And for example, after king f1, escaping the check, but still there is queen takes f3. And after rook to g4, again there is rook takes h3. And after covering the check, here comes now the queen h1 check. And after covering the check again, but there is a simple knight to g3, and the black here wins in just 26 moves, because if the white here insists to move here to king to e1, but still there is queen takes g1 checkmate. So going back, for example, after f5, the white here should play bishop to c4 and accept the fact that after, for example, bishop takes f2, queen takes f2, queen takes c4, e takes e5, e takes e5, rook a c1. Although the white here is actually behind a pawn, but we shall see in this position now that the white pieces here is actually on a attacking position. For example, after rook to c1, in which it actually attacks now the queen and the rook, for example, and there is a threat to bishop to e7, forking the rook and pawn, and with an attack, for example, on this pawn on a7. Although in this position, the white here is actually a pawn down, but the white here has a huge attacking chances. So going back, for example, one more time, after d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, e6, knight f3, knight f6, and e3. And for example, after knight b7, queen c2, and bishop to d6. Going back, for example, after bishop to e2, in which the black here can immediately castle on the king side. And after king side castling, rook to a8, rook to d1, queen to e7, e4, e takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, e5, and for example after bishop to g5, queen to f8, and bishop to d3 with a threatening mate in 1, and for example after f5, in which the white here actually blundered after a capture on the pawn on f5 because the queen was actually been trapped. So after f5, with the same attacking motif for black, the white here should play queen to h4 and again accept the fact that for example after e4, c5, bishop takes c5, bishop c4 check, king h8, d takes c5, and after a takes f3 and bishop to f4. Although the white here is actually a pawn down, but still the white here has a double bishop that actually compensate his pawn deficit on this position. So after d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, e6, we will actually go for a semi-slab variation against the Queen's Gambit Declined. For example, after knight f3, knight f6, e3, knight bd7, queen c2, and bishop to d6, because it is actually a deadly weapon against the Queen's Gambit Declined. So I hope you enjoyed this video and please don't forget to subscribe.